I would just say that anything that's not regulated, just stay away from it and be very clear about why are you getting into an investment. I mean, you are not starting a business of lending to people, right?
Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of This or That. Our guest today is Mrin Agarwal. She is founder of FinSafe, a financial education company she started in 2015. She is also a co-founder of Womantra, a company focused on women financial literacy. She has over 28 years of experience in wealth management. Before starting this company, she managed some large portfolios with Citibank and Deutsche Bank. She achieved her own financial independence and she wanted to educate people and she's passionate about it. So let's welcome Mrin for some insightful session on financial planning. Hi Mrin, thank you for being here and welcome to the first episode of This or That. We will start with basic questions. And my first question that comes to my mind is, what is financial freedom? What is the role of financial planning in financial freedom and when should someone start it?
Hi, Bhartendra. Thank you for having me here today. I think financial freedom is really being the master of your time. I've always believed time is the biggest asset, and financial freedom is really about living life on your terms, utilizing the time the way you want to, because you have enough for all of your financial goals and to lead your life. Now, how do we get there, right? So, as with any other goal that we want to plan for in life, we need to have a structured approach, and that structured approach over here is called as financial planning. And a lot of people actually confuse financial planning with just investing. But financial planning is a lot more, and it's actually a multi-step process which includes some components. So the first thing, of course, I would say is budgeting. And while it sounds like the most boring thing to do under the sun, but it is important to do that, because if you're not budgeting, then you wouldn't know how much you're saving, right? The second thing is actually to be prepared for emergencies and contingencies. So very often I have seen that people jump into investing and they want to get into that best stock, best investment, but they're not prepared in case if there is some sort of a contingency or emergency, right? So, before you actually think of even investing, you really need to ensure that you have your emergency cash in place, you have the right amount of life and health insurance covers available, and then you start investing for financial goals. The first one, of course, being retirement, right? So it is a very, very structured approach where you look at all of these factors. And of course, it's not very easy to do it on one's own. In most cases, you would need help to draw up a proper financial plan. But hopefully, through our podcast, I'll be able to share more insights as to how people can do it themselves.
Great. So, two critical component that I would want you to talk further. One is retirement planning seems to be a very critical component, and while a lot of people say that I will never retire, I will only consider financial planning. But I think most of us would not want to work for money after a certain point of time. So how does one do retirement planning, and when should one start it?
And that's such a pertinent question, Bhartendra, because today I see a lot of people in 50s who are giving up jobs to have a better quality of life. Mm-hmm. And they're like saying, okay, we are done with this work, working for 30 years, logging it out. We're done with it. I think, people have become much, much more conscious about the quality of their life, about their health as well. And that's really getting people to rethink, do we really want to work till the age of 60 or not? And I have wrote an article many years back where I said 50 is the new retirement age, right? Now, it is very important to start saving for retirement the moment you start working. So just a small metric, right? So let's say that you have a 30-year-old who spends 1 lakh rupees a month, okay? And let's say this 30-year-old wants to retire at the age of 60, right? And plan for the next 20 years, which means till the age of 80, okay? So assuming inflation at 6% and return on investment at 12%, the amount that they would need to invest is 40,000 rupees a month at the age of 30. Now, many people think that retirement is something that I need to start planning only in middle age, right? So let's say by the time you get to 40, if you think of starting to plan at that time, the amount that you'll have to invest is going to be 77,000 rupees a month, right? So to the question that you had, that when should we start planning for retirement, I would say right away, because it's going to be much easier and possibly more affordable for you to actually get to that particular goal.
So, Mrin, how does someone go about retirement planning? How does he start? Where does he invest?
In a lot of queries that I get these queries like, I want to have 1 crore for retirement, right? And that's not the right way to go about it. You can't just think of some number thinking that, acha, this number will be enough, right? It really needs to be based on expenses. And again, these expenses need to be inflation adjusted, because the value of 1 lakh today is going to be 3.2 lakhs 20 years down the line. So, number one, you need to inflation adjust this number. Number two is that use a retirement calculator. Very many free calculators available online that you should actually utilize to figure out what is the right amount to invest based upon what are your expenses and what are your age and all of these other factors put together. Now, in terms of where to invest, I think it's very important to have a good amount of equity exposure, and that is because the corpus, if you see, what do you think, Bhartendra, is a good retirement corpus these days?
4 crores, 5 crores.
It's a minimum of 7 to 8 crores, right? And in most cases, it would go to about 10 crores, right? And I've seen so many surveys where people say they're planning for retirement, but the reality is that they're only doing it in the Employee Provident Fund. And that's not going to get them to that 10 crore number. So I think anybody who really wants to plan for financial freedom, should possibly have a 10 crore number in mind today. And I'm talking about people with an average, let's say 1.5 lakh rupees of expenses. I think that's pretty common if you're a family of 4 today. You have school expenses, you have so many other expenses, right? So I think that's the sort of number that one really needs to be looking at. Now, coming back to retirement, if you're looking at a 7 to 8 crore number, to get there is not going to be easy if you're just going to be investing in the EPF. You certainly need to have an equity component. Sticking with the same example where you have a 30-year-old with expenses of 1 lakh a month. Now, let's assume that the person is only investing in the EPF, which is giving you about 8.25% return, right? Currently, the person has to invest 90,000 a month to actually get to the retirement corpus. But if you decide to do an equity option, and let's assume that the equity option is giving you a 12% return in the long term, then the person has to invest only 40,000 rupees a month, right? So I think it's really important that while you think of starting early, it is also very important to have a good amount of equity allocation, because it makes it easier for you to basically do the investment. And what is the equity allocation that can be taken for retirement? It can be done through the National Pension Scheme, or it can be done through equity mutual funds as well.
So, when you say equity mutual funds, which funds would you say people should start? I mean, what are the mutual funds they should choose? I mean, that's the first question. I mean, mutual fund, information on mutual fund is so much out there, but moment somebody starts at which fund, where to invest. So, what would you recommend?
So I would always say a combination of index funds, flexi cap funds and mid cap funds works well. But again, if there's someone who's very new to investing, and many times it can get very overwhelming to figure out what fund to buy. I mean, there's so many different categories that are available. Even within the index fund, for example, now you have factor-based funds, and it becomes really difficult for people to figure out. So just a simple Nifty 50 index fund, a Nifty 150 mid-cap index fund is a good place to start. Of course, there are some very good actively managed flexi-cap funds and mid-cap funds available as well.
So, when next, the immediate two questions that comes to me is why NPS? Because it's locked in for 60 years, and how many funds are enough for somebody?
Generally, if you look at all financial goals put together, I would say that 6 to 7 funds at the max are good enough. in a portfolio. I do see people having 20, 25 funds very often.
More.
You really don't need that. Yeah, you really don't need so many. Again, just sticking to the three categories that I talked about, Nifty 50 index fund, the flexi cap fund and the mid cap fund. Within these, again, based on your risk profile and how much risk you're willing to take, you could choose a set of funds. Do of course check out the overlap within the funds as well. But I think 6 to 7 funds is all that one really needs across all the financial goals, not only retirement, right? Now, coming back to retirement and talking about the National Pension Scheme, actually, I'm a big proponent of the NPS, although there is this huge lock-in that's there till the age of 60. And that's actually what works for that scheme, because one is really not able to pull the money out. The money is left over there to compound, right? We have seen all the data which shows us that the average that people hold SIP is only a couple of years. And there's a lot of churning based on recent performance. We've seen this investor behavior continuing not just now, for decades and decades, right? So I think what really works for the NPS is the fact that the money is there locked until the age of 60 and you're leaving it there to compound. You have an option to take exposure to equity at a very low cost. And the other thing is, we should remember, Bhartendra, that not everybody finds it very easy to plan for the post-retirement income. Whereas in the NPS, you have the pension coming in, and now even with the 60% lump sum portion, that like earlier, the 60% portion you could take it as a lump sum, but now you can actually set up like a systematic withdrawal plan on that lump sum portion as well, right? And that will be tax-free.
So, even NPS has multiple options. Which NPS? The other day, someone was asking. He came with the NPS app and saying, "इसमें से कौन सा चाहिए?" So,
yeah, I know. Sometimes I wish there weren't so many options. Honestly, having too many options makes it very difficult for people to figure out कि कौन से लेना चाहिए. So, firstly, in NPS, you have two options. One is active, other is auto.
okay.
So, in the active choice, you have to decide how much in equities, how much in bonds, which could be corporate bonds or government bonds. And if you're not able to decide that, you have the auto choice, where the funds are allocated between debt and equity in a predetermined manner based upon your age and based on the risk that you've chosen. So, they could be aggressive, moderate, conservative. Based on the option that you choose, the allocation is going to happen. Now, again, given that you're investing in the NPS for long term, and I would think, again, for most people, they would be doing the NPS where they have at least more than 10 years to go for retirement. I would highly recommend the active equity option, because that's the option where you can possibly get the best returns, given the fact that there's 75% exposure to equity there. The issue with the other options is also, like, for example, if you look at the auto aggressive option, after the age of 35, the percentage allocation to equities keeps falling, and pretty much by the time you're 50, the allocation goes down to just 20%, right? Mm-hmm. So here we're talking about maximizing the equity allocation to build a larger corpus, and that would, I would think that can be best achieved through the active equity option.
With respect to mutual fund, you mentioned that person should choose as per his risk profile. And I've seen the kind of questions that come at risk profile is very difficult. And if you ask anyone, I don't think they know what their risk profile is. So how does someone know what is their risk profile?
Very simple. Actually, there are a lot of psychometric tests that are available, but most people find it very difficult to answer those questions.
Yes.
And they also tend to have too many questions, which turns people off. So very simple. If you have 100 rupees to invest, how much of it can you put at risk and how much of it do you want to put in a safe investment? I think that's a good, just very easy thumb rule to use to figure out your risk profile. So, for example, if you're saving, again, let's say retirement, and it's long-term in nature. So, you can then decide, if I'm putting 100 rupees for this particular goal, how much of it can I put in a risky investment and how much of it do I want to put in a safe investment? And that could be your risk profile. It may not be the textbook way of, figuring out risk profile, but I think it's a more practical way of doing it.
There are two questions that immediately come to my mind based on what you have told me. It's a good advice to start early, but I think most of the people don't. You know, lot of most would be wrong, but a lot of people don't. Okay, and so somebody who is in the 40s, obviously his investment amount required would be much high. So what can they do to salvage the situation? What can they do now, who is there in their early 40s or mid 40s, to achieve the retirement purpose?
Well, I think they would certainly need to again, be on a vengeance to increase their equity allocation. So let's take an example of a 45-year-old with 1 lakh rupees of expenses. Now, again, if you're going to just stick with fixed return instruments or the EPF, the amount that you need to invest to get to your retirement corpus is going to be 2 lakhs a month, right? Is it doable? Very difficult, because remember, at the age of 45, your expenses are also increasing. If you have kids, then kids' expenses are growing as the children grow as well, right? So certainly you will need to look at adding up equity to the portfolio. And again, if you can make investments into equities which are, let's say, yielding you about 12%, then the amount that you need to invest is going to fall to about 1.35 lakhs or so, right? So those are the numbers. Now, again, you may not have that much disposable income.
Even that is a high number.
Yeah, even that's a high number to look at allocating, right?
Yeah.
So then you have the option of doing a step-up SIP, right? So what is a step-up SIP? Basically, you start an SIP and you look at topping it up by 10% every year, and you continuously do this, right? Again, the focus over here is it may not increase returns for you, but what it will do is help you build a larger corpus, right? So in the same example, if the person starts with 80,000 rupees of SIP and looks at increasing this every year, then they can meet their goal, right? So those numbers might be more doable.
Could you speak more about what is step-up SIP? How does it work?
So very simple. You start an SIP. You look at increasing it every year by a particular percentage, right? And again, as I said, the whole idea in this is it's not going to increase returns. And Bhartendra, this is what I want to point out, that there is so much of focus on returns, and I want to generate this 15% return. But first and foremost, if you look at SIP returns itself over the decades, they're actually falling, right? And I think a good number to expect from equities would be about 10 to 12%, right? Now, whether you're going to be investing 1 lakh a year or you're going to be investing 2 lakhs a year, the returns are not going to change, right? But by doing the step-up SIP, what you're essentially doing is that you are basically increasing your corpus value to maybe about 3 times in the long term, right? And that's where the real focus needs to be. We need to move away from trying to forecast returns to what we can control, which is how much we are investing, where, and for how long.
The other very important goal that people have is child's planning. The point is, the reason we need financial planning is we have limited money. It's easy. I've seen some videos where people say, no, you do child's planning and you do retirement planning, and if you have unlimited money, then there is no concern. The money is limited, right? So how does one prioritize between a child's future and his retirement? Because that's as emotional decision, and most of the people go ahead with child's planning. So how does one go about it?
Yes, I know that there would be a tendency to look at the immediate goals first, and one always thinks that अभी retirement के लिए तो time है, क्यों अभी इतना जल्दी इसके बारे में सोचना है? But as a financial advisor, I would actually say that retirement planning is non-negotiable. Right, and that's because that's at an age where you're not earning income and you have to fend for yourself. And Bhartendra, I think the social structure of our society has changed a lot. I don't think that we ourselves want to be dependent on our children, and I don't think that all that is going to exist in the future, where children are going to take care of retired parents and all that, So I really feel that retirement planning is non-negotiable. But that being said, obviously, we need to balance all our goals, right? And somewhere you need to strike a balance where, you are saving for retirement as well, and you're saving for child's education. Maybe you're not able to do, optimally for both of them, but I would say that each individual needs to figure out that balance for themselves. as to how they can actually balance out both the goals. But I don't think it can be like I will look at the immediate goals first and then only I will look at retirement planning.
So retirement planning comes at the top.
Yes, always.
So what is the expectation one should have from the equity and from overall portfolio?
Well, I think from equities, certainly I would say in the range of about 10 to 12% is a good expectation to have in the long term again. And I want to clarify this because, again, I have seen all sorts of videos where, people are assuming that you're going to get a 12% return every year.
It's easy in Excel.
Yeah, it's easy to do that in Excel, right? But that's not the case, right? And when we're talking about this 12% return, it is in the long term, right? So you remain invested for, let's say, 7 to 10 years, 15 years, that's when you'll get it. It doesn't mean that you're going to get it every year because you know how markets are. They could be up, down, and even intra-year markets are down by about 10 to 15% every year. So whoever is getting into equities, I think first and foremost, it has to be for the long term, which is 7 to 10 years. Secondly, remember that this 10 to 12% return is not going to happen every year like a fixed deposit, right? It could be minus 10% one year, 20% the other year, 15% the next year, right? So on an average, this is the number. Now, again, this is just on equities. This doesn't mean that your entire portfolio is going to be at this number. So the portfolio return is going to be dependent upon, of course, what is the asset allocation, how much do you have in fixed return investments or debt versus how much you have in equities. Generally, if you look at household data in India, people have less than 10% in equities, right? So if we are assuming like, 10% in equities and 90% in fixed return instruments, then you are basically looking at a number of about 7% or 8%, 7 to 8% on the entire portfolio.
So we spoke about NPS, we spoke about equity funds. So in the overall portfolio, what is beyond mutual fund and NPS? What are the other options that people have?
Not too many, I think. I think maybe gold ETF is an option. But again, given the fact that Indian families have so much of physical gold with them, and generally the recommended allocation to gold is about 15%, I wouldn't think that even gold is actually really too much of an option. But I would say, yes, gold ETF is certainly an option.
So we have sorted, right? So we have NPS, we have equity, and we have gold ETF. What else?
What else is not an option?
So then if you are saying people are doing 10% of allocation to equity, what is this 90% then? What are people doing?
It's still traditional investments like insurance policies, fixed deposits, and I see a lot of interest in real estate investments. So all of a sudden, it reminds me of these plantation schemes that were there back in the 90s. But you have these farm plots available where they do some organic farming, and all of that has also again become quite popular. And in fact, I would say some of the things that you should not be doing, right, would be things like this, these farm plots, because remember, this is not a regulated investment. I would also not recommend things like cryptocurrencies or P2P. P2P is again very popular. But again, given the risk in those investments, I really wouldn't recommend it as well. Another investment which is unregulated, which I see, is this whole gold leasing. Because firstly, it's not regulated. So what happens here is you buy some digital gold, and on the same platform, you can lend it out to various jewelers who are there on that platform. So, I would just say that anything that's not regulated, just stay away from it and be very clear about why are you getting into an investment. I mean, you are not starting a, business of lending to people, right? So that's something that you need to be very clear about when you're investing your money, that what are you actually trying to do with that money.
So see, problem is people understand gold. If you go to mutual fund, they get scared. They go to bonds, they get scared. They understand gold. So then the next question should be, how do you balance, chasing returns versus building your portfolio? I mean, I'm not sure if people understand the word portfolio, so I'll put it this way. How do you chase return, or how do you construct the set of 5-6 investment avenues where you invest money? How do you achieve that balance?
So I just saw this data actually from one of the mutual funds where they showed from FY 2006 to financial year 2024, if you had, just invested, let's say, in a mid cap fund and remained invested, you would have made 16.6%. But, if you kept changing and chasing the recent performing fund, your return was actually 14.5%, right? So I think what is really important is to stop chasing returns. As I said, just have that returns expectation of 10 to 12% in your mind and just remain invested. That is the real key to building wealth in the long term.
So you said people should have maximum 6 to 7 funds in a portfolio. So let's say somebody has identified goods 5, 6, 7 funds, then he should stick with it or should not change, because I keep getting questions, should I buy this fund, should I buy that fund? More importantly, if NFO is coming, people saying should I buy this NFO. So I want to understand what is the role of NFO. If I already have 5, 6 funds in my portfolio for that particular goal, should I consider that NFO, or what is your view on NFO?
I wouldn't look at an NFO unless it had something new to offer, which is really not there in the market already. If you look at most of the NFOs that come, firstly, they're very in concentrated funds like thematic funds or sector funds. And, most NFOs come when that particular sector has had recent very good performance, right? But we should remember that where thematic and sector funds or concentrated funds are concerned, the point is that they are going to be cyclical in nature, and the performance may not really play out in the long term, right? Plus, if you look at any theme or sector, it's always going to be there in the broad-based funds. So I would say, to me, NFOs is actually a strict no, and I would just prefer existing funds who've got 20-25 year history that's available for you to look at versus chasing the NFOs.
So then the question is, once let's say somebody has picked up 3-4 funds, he started investment, should he be adding more funds to it, or he should stick to whatever is there? I mean, should someone go about adding funds?
I would say that that's really dependent upon the existing fund performance. So of course, once a year you should evaluate your portfolio to see whether the funds are performing in line, whether the funds are performing well or in line with the markets, or if there is some underperformance. Again, funds do have their own cycles. So, whatever was the top performing fund is 3 years back, it will not be the top performing fund right now. That's the way it's worked in the past. So certainly you need to check for underperformance, and if you do see some underperformance, again, you need to monitor it for a couple of quarters before you really take a decision to exit, right? It shouldn't be that, oh, I checked my portfolio today and I see that this some other fund has done better than this and I just decided to exit, right? So some of the best funds that you have in India today, again with 25-30 year history, had long periods of underperformance, but when you look at it on a long term, they've done really well. And I know some of these calls now, I know your next question, I'm preempting your next question, that how do individuals figure all of this out, right? And it is not easy. And this is where you really do need the help of a financial advisor.
Interesting. So how does someone go about finding a financial advisor?
Yeah, it's not easy. So you of course have the registered investment advisors, but unfortunately we have less than 1,000 RIAs in India today. These are people who work on fees and they have a fiduciary responsibility. But you also have a whole lot of other financial advisors who are also known as mutual fund distributors, who are there, and some of them have the CFP certifications that's there. So I think there are a whole lot of those advisors that are there, and you can always just search by PIN code to see who are the financial advisors who are there in your area. Obviously, it's always nice if you can get a reference of if somebody in your known circle is dealing with a financial advisor and has a good experience, it's always then good to get a reference and find someone. But if that's not the case, as I said, do a search by PIN code to see who's there in your area maybe, and then check out what are the sort of clients that they're dealing with. Is it something similar to your profile, and what are the products, and of course how long they've been in the business, because you want to look at a financial advisor who's been there for at least 10 to 15 years and who has seen different market cycles. That's really important.
I think then financial advisors really make sense. The question is, do people want to pay? They don't want to pay the fee.
Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
want to.
I stay confused. So then the next question, since we are talking about different investment avenues, what is the role of debt mutual fund then? There are so many debt mutual funds. So it will be nice if you can address whether someone should have debt mutual fund. And secondly, there is a very popular category which is balanced advantage fund. So I want you to talk about that also.
All right. So first, talking about debt. Of course, I think debt mutual funds have a role to play in everybody's portfolio because you're not going to have 100% in equity, or let me put it this way, very few people would have 100% equity. Now, I think debt funds are a better way to take that exposure into fixed income versus fixed deposits, simply because, one, the returns are slightly higher. At the same time, with the interest rates falling, you are going to accrue some capital gains out there as well. But I do believe that in the long term, the debt funds would be able to give you a better returns than what you can get in the fixed deposit. Of course, the taxation is the same, right? Now, while for long-term goals, we always talk about equity funds. That's not to say that you can't hold debt funds also for 7 to 10 years, right? So again, based on your risk profile, like I have seen for many investors, the risk profile is actually 30% equity and 70% safer instruments. Now, when you're looking at those safer instruments, I would say any day a debt fund would be better than buying any of these investment linked insurance plans like endowment or ULIP and all of these policies, because when you see the investment linked insurance plans, the returns from these plans are actually pretty low and most cases do not really help you beat inflation. Plus, they come with such a huge lock in. Right? So, you might as well put that money in a debt fund, which is going to be more transparent and it's going to be accessible to you at any point in time.
Would you want to say which that category fund people should choose? Say over fixed deposit. If somebody wants to choose a debt mutual fund, what fund it should be?
I think the short duration debt funds is the preferred category for me. I have seen that over a long period of time, it's a consistently returning category, and if you look at some of the other categories, I mean, honestly, they're really meant for institutional investors and they can be much, much more volatile, right? So again, in a debt fund, choose the category based upon your investment horizon. If you're looking at a short duration debt fund, you need to have an investment horizon of at least 3 years,
3 years.
for that particular investment. Otherwise, look at the ultra short duration debt fund. But anything 3 years and above, I think the short term debt funds is a good idea. You do have other categories, but again, I find them to be quite volatile and hence I would just stick with this.
Would you like to talk about the balanced advantage fund?
I think it's really meant for people, who really don't know how much do I put in debt, how much do I put in equity. And, so first and foremost, the balanced advantage fund invests in debt and equity based on a proprietary model of the fund house, wherein they change the allocations based on their model. So ideally, when the markets are up, then they would have a higher allocation to debt and vice versa. So the good thing in balanced advantage fund is that first of all, they're doing the allocation to both bonds and equities, and they're also doing the rebalancing on a regular basis, right? So it's one of, if you ask me, again, if an investor doesn't know which fund to start with, doesn't know what to do, I think it's a great category to put your money in.
So this fund could also be one of the funds that somebody chooses first?
Yes, absolutely. Especially if you don't want to take 100% equity.
Okay. So I want to go back to the investment avenues you suggested for retirement planning. You mentioned NPS and you mentioned equity funds, index fund, flexi cap funds. Do you think people should also have debt fund for retirement portfolio?
Not really. Like if you are a salaried employee and you already have the employee provident fund, then you don't need it, right? But let's say you don't have the EPF, then yes, you could look at having a debt component.
Otherwise, you're saying for retirement, I think NPS and equity mutual funds is sufficient.
Yes.
Okay. So, like you're saying, short duration funds can be replacement for the fixed deposit. Do you think it could also be an option for emergency funds?
Absolutely, the ultra short duration debt funds or liquid funds are a great option for emergency funds.
I just want to, that's another critical component of financial planning. So, emergency funds, what are the options? We can have short duration funds.
You can have ultra short duration funds, you can have fixed deposits, and I always would suggest to keep some money in the savings account because at the time of emergency, you need access right away. So I think maybe having 25% of the emergency fund in the savings account also is a good idea. But of course, you should not be looking. You should not think that money is available for you to spend on discretionary on fun expenses.
So maybe have a separate account and keep it there.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
So what should be the amount somebody should consider for emergency planning? Because it should not be very high, very low.
At least 6 months of your
expenses.
Necessary expenses. Yeah.
Okay. Of 6 months of your necessary expenses divided between ultra short duration fund, savings, and fixed deposit.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So another investment category or investment product that I want to talk about is direct equity. So that's a very popular category. So far what we have been discussing is that people can plan their retirement using equity funds, NPS. People can do their emergency planning from short duration, ultra short duration funds, fixed deposit, savings account. What is the role of equity then? Should people, choosing between equity mutual funds and equity, what is your take?
So maybe you could just say, where does equity stand in this whole thing?
So where does equity stand, and also we have this category of stock baskets, so how does somebody choose between equity, stock baskets and equity mutual fund,
Well, I think, before you get into direct equities, you really need to check, do I have the right information resources? Do I have the ability to actually evaluate these companies? And, Bhartendra, for a lot of people, even though it's easy to buy, right? But the more difficult thing is, if the markets fall, what do you do, right? Or if the markets go up, do you do profit booking? And a lot of emotions come into play out here because you're always going to think, when the markets are going up, you're always going to believe that the markets are going to go up further, and you'll be like, no, I don't want to exit it, right? So all of these emotions also come at play, right? The biggest aspect, Bhartendra, really is, do you actually have the time for all this? Right? And I know it sounds exciting and all of that, but honestly, investing in direct stocks requires a lot of time. You need to be constantly monitoring the stocks and taking decisions. Do you actually have the ability to do that? Right? Now, as far as stock baskets are concerned, right? So they give you these ideas as to what you can buy and when you need to sell or buy more or whatever, change the allocation. But again, do people actually follow it through? And again, maybe a couple of months you'll do it out of excitement. After that, it's going to be another chore in your life, right? And you should not forget that every time you do a rebalancing, there's going to be a cost and a tax implication as well. And don't forget that short-term capital gains is at 20% now. So, I would say that before you get into direct stocks or stock baskets, evaluate whether, you have the ability to actually manage all of this, right? And I would say that for most people who are really focused on, building their life and their careers, I would say leave the stock picking to the experts and leave it and just invest through the mutual funds.
So, I also would want you to address this portfolio question further. So, we are saying, what I understand is that we should have portfolios for each of our goals. Okay, so retirement we understood, NPS and equity mutual funds. So what, so for other goals, so for example, child, for example, wealth creation, how do we go about those portfolios?
So similarly, what you need to do is that you need to work on a goal planning calculator to figure out the amount to be invested based upon, of course, the goal value and the inflation. And once you know that, again, based on the time period of investment, you need to choose the various products and, of course, risk. So time period of investment and risk are the two factors on basis on which you will choose a product. So for example, let's say you have a goal in the next 3 years, which is, let's say I want to go for a concert, right? or you want to take some sort of a dream vacation, for example. In that case, what you need to do is first figure out what is the amount that you need to save. Second, remember that since it's just a 3-year period, you cannot get into equities because equities is going to be really volatile, right? And hence, you will need to look only at debt instruments for such sort of a goal, right? When you're looking at, let's say now you have a goal which is 6 years away, okay? Here, you can look at debt, you can look at equity, right? So the choice here is really going to be dependent upon how much of risk can you take, right? And you could just say, okay, let me just do a balance fund because it's just much easier. I'll have 60% equity, maybe 65% equity, and the balance amount of it in debt, right? So a lot of what we do is actually dependent upon, one, what is the time period to the investment, and what is the risk that one can take. Now, even if you can take a risk in a 3-year period in equities, ideally you should not do it, because equities are going to be really volatile. Yeah. So remember that, for shorter term goals, it's always debt. And for the longer term goals, you want to have, of course, a higher allocation to equities.
Again, let's stick to the portfolio construction. We are saying we should have 4, 5 funds, 6 funds. So how do we achieve diversification in these funds? One, and should we have it from the same AMC? Should we have it from different AMC? How do I structure that?
Yeah, so diversification is at different levels. Not only is it among asset classes, but within the subcategories, and I would say within fund houses. So for example, of course, we talked about diversification from debt and equity. But if we look at the equity category, again, you have large cap, mid cap, small cap. And a good way to achieve diversification in equities would be to have a combination of a Nifty 50 index fund, look at actively managed flexi cap and mid cap funds. You could also look at the Nifty 150 mid cap index as well. So between these, right? So again, these are the subcategories that you would look at within equities, right? Now, within this, it's very important, especially in the actively managed fund space, it is very important that you choose different fund houses, So I have seen people having the same fund house, large cap, mid cap, small cap. There could be some stock overlap that could be there, and style of management, conviction ideas, and stuff like that. So I would say that within these categories, also look at different fund houses. Of course, where the index funds are concerned, you do need to look at the tracking error, which basically gives you an idea as to how well the fund is actually tracking the index, and obviously the lower the tracking error, the better it is. Tracking error is available in most of the fund fact sheets, so you can look out for it over there.
You specifically mentioned as tracking?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. So within these funds that we mentioned, let's go back to equity funds. So we have multi-caps, we have index funds, we have large cap, mid cap, and small caps. What I understand, if you choose index funds and multi-cap funds, you have achieved the diversification. In multi-caps, you have large cap, mid cap, small caps. Then how do you figure out why do you need large cap, mid cap, small caps,
Yeah, I mean, you could decide to basically, focus the large cap through the index funds, and then look at the actively managed mid cap and small cap space, because there are quite a few funds which have given consistent outperformance as compared to the benchmark. So you could look at doing that. Of course, again, if you feel that, okay, it's very difficult for me to decide how much to do in mid cap, how much to do in large cap, you could just stick with a multi cap, right? So it's very person dependent on your ability to really choose these funds, and also the type of risk that you want to take, right? So certainly the mid cap fund is going to come with a higher amount of risk, which you're willing to take because you expect higher returns from it as well.
So would it be right to say that my base should be index funds and multi-cap funds, and then I can look at adding mid-caps and small? I would want you to talk about SWP, because I got a call recently saying, yaar, मेरे को SIP बंद करना है, SWP चालू करना है. I was laughing, but then, people have to understand that SWP is not investment. You're withdrawing the money.
Yeah, I mean, the number of inquiries that I've gotten SWP, I've got 25-year-olds who are asking me, we want to set up an SWP, and I'm like, it's your age to be investing in SIPs, and you're talking about SWP, which is, for financial advisors, SWP is one of those products which is used in retirement, for example, right? So, here's what it is. So, SWP stands for Systematic Withdrawal Plan, right? Where you're withdrawing the units, on a regular basis. And ideally, you need to use it, because you want to, you need the money on a regular basis. So, it could be like retired people need it for their regular expenses, right? Now, see, one of the things in the SWP is the fund that you choose, right? Equity cannot be chosen for SWP. Okay. Most of the videos that you have today talk about doing SWP on equities and they assume a 12% return on it. But we just talked about this, that the 12% return is not something that happens every year. Right? So let's take an example that somebody is retiring and they have a 2 crores corpus and they set up an SWP, but markets fall by 10% the next year. So their corpus is going to fall to, let's say, 1.8 crores, for example, right? How will then the SWP numbers work out? Right? So again, on Excel, it's very easy to do all of this. In real life, if you have to make this work out, first and foremost, please remember, you can only do SWP ideally, you should be doing SWP in a product that is giving you more consistent returns, right? And that can only happen in debt funds, right? It cannot be equities, number one. So ideally, the way you need to do SWP is do it in a fund which has more consistent returns, and that will be basically debt funds. So look at investing into a short duration debt fund for a couple of years and then set up the SIP. Because what will happen is that if you look at just investing into a fund and then starting SIP from the next month, you're essentially pulling out your money itself.
So basically SWP is either a retirement product where once you have, or you would say once you have accumulated certain corpus, then only, so it's not like
it's a product for someone who wants the regular income. Right.
And to get the regular income first, you need to have the corpus. So,
yes.
SIP is what you have to do.
Yes. SIP with step up SIP, I would say.
You mentioned that you're against ULIP and endowment policies, but there I keep getting calls, and there if you read they're guaranteed returns. There are still products associated which are promising returns. So what do you suggest about this? What is the role of insurance then?
I suggest not to go in for those, because you should remember that how can someone give you a 10% guaranteed return today when banks are not able to do it? Right? And the 10% that's been shown is on the sum assured. It's not on the premium that you paid. So you would always calculate returns on what you're paying, right?
Correct.
Which is the premium.
Correct.
Right? So that's one. Yes, and I would only recommend term plans. Please remember that the role of insurance is to provide you protection and not to give you an investment return.
So then what is the correct amount of term insurance? How does one select it?
There is this human life value calculator that's available in most of the insurance company websites. You can access that and you can calculate for yourself. And again, the reason that I also recommend term insurance is because when you actually work on the HLV, and it's basically, what does the HLV tell you? That if the individual is no more, what is the amount of money the family needs to lead the same lifestyle and also meet their financial goals. So you would see that in most of the cases, the insurance requirement is going to come in a couple of crores, right? Now, it's impossible to buy a 1 to 2 crore cover through endowment or ULIP or any of these other investment linked policies. And the cheaper way of buying it is through the plain vanilla term plan.
So again, you should buy one term policy, a couple of term policy. How should because that's also a relevant question, because let's say you started early and you bought 1 crore term insurance, and then maybe after 5-6 years you want to buy another term insurance. So you should buy it from the same company. You should buy it from a different company.
I think that's just a matter of what you're more comfortable with. It doesn't really matter. You could buy it from the same company. You could decide to have it in 2 different policies. I think it's just what you feel more comfortable with. Honestly, from a claim process perspective, obviously it's going to be easier if you all have it in one company, but I would leave it to the individual.
Any criteria how to select which insurance company to go with you would want to suggest?
Well, I think you should certainly look at the claim settlement ratio, and the claims payout ratio is becoming more relevant now. This information is published online by the regulator for insurance, so you could, base it on that. And certainly you want to look at companies where the claim settlement ratio is above 90%.
So I got once a call from a relatively newer term insurance company, and they said, we have just started, so our number of claim settlement ratio will not be comparable to some of them. So how do you judge those companies?
I would still go with the company which has above 90%.
Oh, all right. So then next insurance would be health insurance. What is the right amount for health insurance? And should someone have a health insurance other than the insurance provided by their employer?
Oh, absolutely, because nothing is certain. In these times of job insecurity, I think it's very important to have external health insurance for you and your family. I see that after COVID, people have started giving importance to health insurance, because up till then it was like, oh, this is a wasteful expenditure, we don't claim it, and so much of money is going waste. But after COVID, people have become really serious about health insurance. But again, Bhartendra, the question is, do you have the right amount? Right? So today, having 3 to 5, 8 lakhs insurance is actually very inadequate, because when you look at the cost of treating any large illness, it's going to be in the range of about 10 to 20 lakhs. And if you have to meet those expenses, that's the sort of amount of insurance that you need to have, which is, let's say, 10 to 20 lakh rupees. I think for a family of 3 or 4, I think that's a good cover to have.
So then, similar to life insurance, what is the good criteria to select health insurance?
Of course, claim settlement and claim payout ratio, right, is very important. The data is available online, right? So just search for claim settlement and claim payout ratio, right? And I think that's a good number. The other thing in health insurance to always remember is, do not buy a policy based on the premium. So typically, if you see a cheaper policy, it's going to have a lot of exclusions. So 2-3 things you need to look at. You need to look at what are the exclusions in the policy, like what's not covered in the policy, right? Second thing is, are there any sort of sublimits? Like there could be limits on room rent, for example, where they could say that, we'll only pay X amount for the room rent. And, you could be in whichever category of room, but they'll only pay up to an X amount. And the third thing is to see, of course, the waiting periods. And the fourth thing to see is there any co-payment or not? Right? So, you need to check out all of these factors, but I think the really 3 important ones are really about the waiting periods, the inclusions, exclusions, and the sublimits. Now, all of these 3 basically drive the premium on the policy. So, a lot of people tend to choose a policy just because the premium on that policy is low, but what it means is that you're getting into something that may not cover a lot of stuff, right? So, look at all of these factors put together before buying a health insurance.
Let's say these 3 factors are equal. The top brands, they charge a premium on their brand. So typically, if you buy a health insurance policy from a top brand, top 4-5 brands, compared to say somebody relatively new, you will find a big difference in the premium, right? So you would how does one?
Yeah, I would still, again, then I would look at the claims payout ratio to basically choose the policy.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, you want to read a few reviews and everything, and really, also do that bit of check as well.
Since you mentioned about the claim settlement ratio, just data popped up in my head. Unclaimed investments, right? So I was checking for life insurance. I think there is about more than 20,000 crore unclaimed data is there. So what is the role of your nominee in here? What is the difference between?
Yeah, and I think it's very important to talk about this aspect of estate planning. It's not a topic that people really like to talk about too much, but I think it's really important. You'll be surprised to see some of the unclaimed amounts that's there even in things like EPF, where you would think that there would be a nominee, right? The last that I saw this data was in March 23 data, where I saw that there was 48,000 crores of unclaimed assets lying with the Employee Provident Fund. right? And a couple of things that I think people should be aware, and a lot of times people think that if I have a nominee, then it's enough. Everything will be taken care of. But there is a difference between the nominee and the legal heir. The nominee is a person who is the caretaker of a person's wealth. The legal heir is the rightful owner of the wealth on the death of the person. Okay. So in very, very crude terms, what it really means is that when an individual passes, the nominee basically has to do all the running around and get the assets and pass it on to the legal heir. Or the legal heirs can also approach the financial institutions to get the assets. But it's very important to note that the nominee is not the owner of the assets, right? And of course, you still need to nominate. Like, you might say, then why do I need to nominate, right? It's important to nominate because it just makes the transmission process easier. Because any financial institution, if you're nominating, for example, what you're saying is that on my death, I want this person to basically get the money. So it becomes easier for financial institutions to then do the transmission process. And hence it's important to nominate as well. So the ideal situation would be where you would actually nominate somebody who's a legal heir.
So what is the process of declaring legal heir? Because generally whenever we are doing investment, we're just declaring nominee, and in some cases it has become mandatory. But there's no one asks during the investment. So
yes, absolutely. So there are two things out here. First and foremost, an individual needs to write a will in order to declare who they want their monies to go to. So those would be the legal heirs. In the absence of a will, the succession laws would apply, and every religion in India has different succession laws that are applicable. So for example, for Hindus, when a man dies, everybody thinks that when a man dies, all his money goes to his wife, but that's not correct. Actually, his money is equally divided between his wife, his children, and his mother. So if you want your assets the way you want it to go, or to the people whom you want it to go to, you need to write a will. And if there is no will, then the succession laws will apply. And actually, claiming of assets without a will is also more cumbersome and more time consuming as well. So it's always good for people to write a will.
So Mrin, we covered the financial planning in detail. So we have covered how to plan for your emergency. We have covered for life insurance, health insurance. We've covered for retirement planning. We have covered what are the different investment options, how to achieve diversification. So if to sum it up, what are the things that people should focus in 2025 and how to really create wealth?
All right. So I think the first thing is to actually do a review of your portfolio, right? Because I have seen that over the last few years, markets have been doing well and people have been just piling on investments all over the place, right? Now, of course, we're seeing a bit of downtrend in the markets right now, where mid caps and small caps are down by 14-15%, right? And I think it's a good time for people to actually check what they own and to see if they really want to own this further or not, right? Have they for example, have you invested this money with a goal in mind? So if you haven't, then first of all, attach a goal to it, right? The second thing is, can you take volatility or not? Right? Because markets could fall further. So if markets fall further, how are you going to feel about it? Right? So check whether you can take this volatility or not. I think it's very important to see there's a lot of focus on equities. There's a lot of noise about equities. But again, when you look at household data, and even from my own experience of dealing with investors, people tend to have less than 20% in equity. Even I think 20% is a very high number to talk about. It's just that there's a lot of noise and a lot of buzz around it, right? So, one of the things we talked about overall portfolio return.
Correct.
Now, one of the things that I think people need to do is to actually see whether your portfolio is actually beating inflation on an overall basis, right? So the entire money that you have, if you put it together on a weighted average basis, are you actually beating that 7% inflation number or not? Because if you're not, then you're not growing your wealth, right? And I think so we really need to look at things at a portfolio level. Let's just not look into those couple of equity investments which are buzzing at this point in time.
While we have covered a lot of things, since you are talking about, people collecting random stuff, recently I've got a lot of interest, people are saying, looking at unlisted equities, unlisted securities, what is your view on that?
I wouldn't recommend it at all. All these are just, again, it boils down to the fact that what is your ability to really evaluate some of these investments, and if they are even regulated.
And how to not lose money, Mrin?
I'm not remembering who said this quote. I'm not remembering that. There's this very famous quote that the investor's biggest enemy is the investor himself or herself, right? And I think that there are certain investing actions that basically get you to lose money. First and foremost is, of course, chasing trending investments, churning, trying to make quick returns, right? We are seeing this F&O, how many people are jumping into it. And then you see the regulator data that shows that 93% of people actually make losses in it, right? The other thing is really basing your investment decisions on tips or based on social media content that you're seeing, on fin influencers, right? And I know that, we are also making a podcast, but please remember that what is the source of information? Is it a person who has been lucky with investing and then sharing some ideas or sharing their experiences, right? And the other bit that you need to remember is also that the risk-taking ability that you have, the amount of money that you have is very different from what somebody out there has who might be giving out some advice, right? So I think, all of these investing actions can really make you lose money, and you need to be mindful of these.
So, Mrin, over a period of last 20 years, you have dealt with many investors, right?
Years.
Yeah, 28 years, right? So, two things I would want you to address. One is, what are the investment biases that people have, and what are some key, behavior that you have seen in, people, that they should avoid?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's something that's not changed in the last 28 years. It still remains the same herd mentality, or there is FOMO, right? Something that I see right now for the last couple of years is this overconfidence that nothing can go wrong, right? And it's because we're seeing like a lot of people coming in the last 4 years and only seeing the good times. So there's a lot of overconfidence that's there. I would see, and I would say that these 2 or 3 are the main investing biases.
So, Mrin, then how can one really create wealth?
So I think focus on your income generation, right? I've seen this case where, people are thinking that I'll invest 5% or 10% of my take-home income and it's going to give me a 10x return. That's not going to happen, right? You need to be investing 30 to 40% of your take-home income and expect an average return, okay? So that's really point number 1, that, you need to strengthen your base, which is the amount that you're investing. Of course, as I said, have a reasonable returns expectations from those particular investments. Do not expect this 15-20% returns to happen. And very importantly, step up those investments. We talked about how stepping up can really help you build a bigger corpus. The final thing is, which is in your hands, is to actually remain invested for the long term, right? And that is what is really going to create wealth.
Any final advice for the listeners?
I would say keep it simple. Stay with simple instruments. Keep out the noise. There's a lot of noise, right? Be focused on what you can control, which is how much you can invest, where, and for how long. And I think you need to be the tortoise and not the hare.
Thank you for the actionable insights that you have given us. I think the listener will find it very valuable. I hope so. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Bhartendra.